Hey guys, welcome to today's episode, and I'm so excited. We have Dr. Mark Scott from the Total Health Center in Virginia Beach, but he sees people all over the country, and he used to be a chiropractor, and he still is. When I say he used to, he still is, but he's also doing a ton in the functional medicine space, and he helps people with thyroid conditions, digestive and bowel issues, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, weight loss, and so much more. So we're so excited to have you. Welcome, Dr. Mark Scott.
Thanks for having me. It's always good to be here with you. We've done a couple of these in the past, and I've always enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, what I want to talk about today, it's funny because a friend of mine said to me, she said, how are you doing? And I was going into the gym actually, and it was my trainer, and she's like, how you doing today? I said, well, I kind of feel like my health feels like the stock market. I just have like lots of highs and lots of lows. So I want you to talk about a little bit about rheumatology and joint pain, because I'm hearing so many of my friends, the one thing I'm hearing over and over again, I guess all my friends are getting older now, and they're feeling joint pain more than ever. And people are coming up with autoimmune issues like never before. I have a good friend of mine. He went and got all of his lab work done. He literally, his hips were not even moving. He couldn't even hardly get out of bed. He ended up having to go to Johns Hopkins, and they found out he had an autoimmune disease that, is very rare, and they diagnosed him with that. But the lab work didn't show anything. So what would you say for someone who their lab work is not showing anything, and they're like, but I feel miserable?
Well, we have to realize that, conventional care is really about a diagnosis. So they're looking for a named disease. So if you have a disease that hasn't been named yet, then they're not going to find it. So again, they're looking for some kind of pathology that they have a record of, that they can treat with some type of medication. So with autoimmune diseases, and generally, the latest trend in conventional care is immune system suppressing medications. So you see a lot of these ads on TV, and they clear up your psoriasis and whatever, but a lot of these are immune suppressants, which in autoimmune diseases, when your immune system is going haywire and is attacking your own tissues. So when you suppress the immune system no longer attacks the tissues, but you can't go around with a suppressed immune system. So it's really not getting to the root cause of the problem. And that's where functional medicine shines, because with a functional approach, the goal is to figure out why, so your conventional doctor just wants to know what it is. So you go to your doctor and say, I have this pain, and they're going to do testing and labs and say, okay, you've got, rheumatoid arthritis. And what's the treatment? Well, or what causes it? Well, no one really knows. We don't know what causes it. Genetics, blah, blah, blah. And, but the treatment is this Humira or whatever the medication is that suppresses the immune system. With a functional approach, I see lots of autoimmune cases, but I really don't care that much what the diagnosis is, which is kind of odd for people to hear, because they feel like that's so important. Like, I want someone that treats rheumatoid. I want someone that treats Hashimoto's. I want someone that treats Graves. But that's just not how the body works. So, when your immune system starts to go haywire, it's going to attack the weakest link in your system. So if your weak link is your thyroid, then you develop Hashimoto's or Graves. If it's your joints, then you might develop rheumatoid arthritis. If it's the covering of your nerves, then you end up with MS. But they're all variations of the same immune system dysfunction. And that's why a lot of times people, or doctors will say, if you have one autoimmune disease, you're a higher risk of developing another autoimmune disease because of that. And a lot of times patients will come in and say, oh, well, you can't help me because I've had my thyroid removed. One of the treatments for Graves is to remove the thyroid. And they say, oh, well, but that stops the thyroid from being hyperactive, but your immune system is still going haywire. And that needs to be figured out. So that's where functional medicine shines. And that's, what we try to do is look to, okay, what could be causing the immune system to go haywire? And there's lots of different things that can do that.
So, as far as diet for the autoimmune system, I've heard of the autoimmune protocol, which is called AIP, which is basically kind of a paleo diet, but a lot more strict, where they say, okay, you are not going to eat any grains. You're not eating any beans. You're not eating any nuts or seeds or even nightshade vegetables. That means like no tomatoes, no potatoes, and dairy are completely avoided. And they say that combination, and even they say alcohol and coffee as well, and obviously processed sugars and stuff like that, but that people literally feel like a whole new person. Like, yes, they might still have this autoimmune disease, but that autoimmune protocol diet, they at least can kind of get out of bed. They're able to do things. Have you seen the same thing? Is that the best diet for autoimmune? That you just have to be real strict with it, or what is your opinion on that?
That's a great place to jump in, because really what it comes down to, one of the main drivers of immune system dysfunction is gut dysbiosis, or, imbalance in the gut bacteria, a leaky gut, something going on with your intestines. So the autoimmune protocol is a way to avoid all the possible things that could be irritating your intestine. So the way I describe it to my patients is, first we'll test them to see if they have, damage to their intestinal lining, if they have gut dysbiosis, if they have some of these things going on.
So what are the tests, before you move on from that, what are the tests that you do to see if somebody has theirs?
Yeah, so typically what I'll do is I'll do initial workup, and that initial workup will kind of guide me to what areas of the body we might need to look at first. But if we're looking at the gut and we are having indications that there may be, parasites or pathogens or some other gut dysbiosis, there's a stool microbial profile that I look at that is going to look at everything from your good bacteria to your bad bacteria, the balances of the good bacteria, the balances of the bad bacteria, molds, fungus, yeast, parasites. See if any of that stuff is contributing, because just a parasite alone could be a chronic immune system stress that you could have for years and not even know that it's going on. So some of these hidden infections, so whether it's even something like Lyme's disease or, some other virus that's kind of under the surface, it's constantly stressed out the immune system. And then another common test I'll do is looking at different food sensitivities. But one of the tests I like is more looking at the mucosa of the intestinal lining, not the blood. So a lot of, you can go online and do food sensitivity testing. And in my opinion, those are not that accurate for multiple reasons. The lab you use, there's lots of labs out there. Some are better than others, and how sensitive they are. But even more importantly, just looking at the blood, if you say you have a leaky gut or some damage to the intestinal lining, there's undigested particles getting into the bloodstream, and that's going to show up on the test. But that's not really the cause of your problem. That's just a side effect of the leaky gut. So what I found is that usually the things that are the foundations or the start of the gut problem, which then starts the other food sensitivities, are found in the intestinal mucosa. So we're looking at the antibodies in the intestinal mucosa, and that's going to give us a little better information as far as, what started this whole thing. If we get those things fixed, then a lot of times we can reintroduce a lot of these other foods. So with the autoimmune protocol, most of my patients, let's say 90, 100%, don't have to be on the autoimmune protocol forever. So we use that for a short period of time to get the gut healed. And once it's healed, they will reintroduce a lot of those things. But we will identify what are the main contributors that you need to avoid for life, or else this will come back. So that's how I look at the autoimmune protocol diet. Yeah.
So as far as, well, let me read this question. And this is from Cindy. It says, I try to use everything with a natural route of things. My friend has rheumatoid arthritis, and she has a doctor giving her medicine, and I looked it up, and it says it's used for parasites. She's starting to take hydroxychloroquine, and I looked it up, and it is a drug used to help with parasites. I believe I have parasites as well, and I'm trying to figure out, would this be good for my rheumatoid issues?
And this is where, the internet can be so confusing for people because there's so many, and, all of these things have a place. So yes, if you have a parasite, then you might need a parasite cleanse. And that parasite could be contributing to your autoimmune disease, but you may not have a parasite, and that's where the testing really kind of helps narrow things down. So I have a number of autoimmune patients and people with IBS and all kinds of digestive issues, and they don't have any parasites. And then sometimes you'll have people that they don't have any real gastrointestinal disturbance that they're aware of. They feel fine symptomatically, but when you test them, you find they have it. So I think that's where sometimes it's really understanding the testing, and then also navigating all the different tests that are out there can be very confusing as well.
Do you think some of the parasite tests that they don't find the parasites, even though the person might actually have parasites?
Yeah. So I always tell the story to my patients where when I first got into this, I started testing people. I found this patient had H. pylori, which is a parasite that gets into the stomach, and then it burrows into the stomach lining, and then it starts to secrete a mucus, which neutralizes stomach acid. And this prevents you from digesting fats and proteins and key minerals and vitamins. And it keeps your gallbladder from being signaled, so your gallbladder gets congested and cause gallbladder problems. So it can be a big deal from a functional perspective. In a medical perspective, the only thing they really attribute H. pylori to is an ulcer. So if you don't have an ulcer, they don't even check for it. And the testing that most, medical insurance companies and things that are contracted with are more dealing with that pathology, more of a gross pathology, where a lot of the functional labs are looking a little more sensitive. So the lab that I was using is actually looking for so anyway, back to my story is that, at this point in time, H. pylori can be really hard to get rid of. So I wasn't against going after it with some antibiotics just because they had to get rid of it. So we went to this patient's doctor and said, hey, we found this H. pylori. We want to, prescribe some antibiotics, and this doctor decided that they wanted to run their own test. I'm like, all right, whatever. I mean, same thing, stool sample, looks like the same test. Well, their test comes back negative. So now we're like, well, now what? This test is negative, this test is positive. How do you know what's going on? So we actually used an herbal protocol that works great. It actually works better than the antibiotics, and that's what I've been using ever since. But during that time, I did some research, like what's the difference between these two tests? Like why was one positive, one was negative? So the test that this doctor ran was looking for the parasite in the stool. The test I ran was actually looking for like the DNA that's coming off the parasite, that's kind of fluffing off into the stool and coming out. So the test I was looking at was much more sensitive than the test this doctor ran. And that's where sometimes you can say, well, I had that test, I don't have it, but I have all these symptoms. And that's where if you don't do the right testing, sometimes you can keep spinning your wheels.
So give us some of the symptoms that someone would have if they had H. pylori, and what was the name of the test that you used to treat that or to find out if they had it?
So it's, I'm not even sure exactly now which test it was, but it's just an H. pylori test. And there's different labs like Genova and Diagnostics and some of these other companies that have they're more functional labs, so you look at more of a functional labs where a lot of the functional research are using versus say, a traditional lab that most of your medical providers that might use. But what was the other part of the question?
What were some
symptoms? Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you have H. pylori, you're going to have all the low stomach acid symptoms. So like when you watch TV and they say, oh, take Prilosec or Pepcid if you're getting heartburn, reflux, bloating. These are all signs of too much acid, which is actually wrong because the way the stomach works is if your stomach lining is designed to hold acid. So all the lining of your stomach has little cells that make acid, and then your stomach can hold that acid and break down, heavy proteins and even pieces of bone and things like that and dissolve that stuff. And that's what your stomach's designed to do. So when you have enough acid, then that signals your liver to your gallbladder to lose bile, and the food breaks down quickly and it moves into your small intestine. When you don't have enough acid, then this food sits there. You get a little full, you get a little bloated feeling, you start burping and belching, or you may get like heartburn at night when you lay down and reflux. So you get this feeling of itchiness in your throat because there's a little bit of irritation there. It's called silent reflux. And then some people can have just poor digestion, but don't even have any reflux symptoms. They're just slow motility, like they get full and they don't feel like eating for a while or whatever, but they don't feel like reflux. But that's a foundational principle that a lot of people have. So when you go to your doctor, they just put you on Prilosec, right? And then you read, or any other proton pump inhibitor, and you read the label and it says short-term use only. Like, you're not supposed to take this for long-term because it can create all kinds of deficiencies because it blocks all your acid. So it stops the cells in your stomach from producing acid. So, and that's why when you do that, there's no acid to come back up. So, oh, thanks, I feel much better. Thanks, doc. Doing great. But now you read the label and it says short-term use only. So you go back to your doctor and say, well, this says I should take this for like 2 or 3 weeks. What should I do? He's like, well, you can go off it if you want. But what happens? Comes right back, right? Because you never fixed it. So then they go back to your doctor and say, well, what do I do? Well, some people have to be on it for long term. I've had patients that are on these medications for over 15 years. And you wonder why they come in with all these chronic health problems. So that's a big one, is just getting people's stomach acid balanced. And you got to get them off those acid blockers and get more acid.
So let's talk about what gut health has to do with our joints, because I know there's tons of studies that they've done out there that they have found a connection between an unhealthy gut bacteria and rheumatoid arthritis. And so people think, oh my gosh, what does rheumatoid arthritis have anything to do with unhealthy gut bacteria? But you would say you see that all the time, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So just like we were saying, if you have damaged intestinal lining, that can result in something called a leaky gut, which allows undigested particles to get in the bloodstream. And that's one of the main drivers of immune system stress, which can eventually cause the immune system to become autoimmune. So that's, like I said, it doesn't matter whether it's, rheumatoid or Hashimoto's or Graves or MS or any of the other autoimmune diseases. These are just side effects of these stressors to the immune system. One of the primary ones is imbalances in gut bacteria. Not to mention, when the gut bacteria is out of balance, this can have an impact on even turning certain genes on and off. So the gut bacteria are very, very important. There was a study done with mice, and they found that mice that were thin had a certain type of bacteria in their gut that the overweight mice didn't have. So what they did is they took the bacteria from the thin mice, implanted it into the overweight mice, and guess what happened?
Wow.
They lost weight. Yeah. So that's how powerful these microbes can be. And a lot of these things, through years of antibiotic use, as a child, and a lot of things, even just, having a conventional childbirth, vaginal childbirth versus a cesarean, when you go through the vaginal canal, you get a lot of these bacteria that help start your microbiome. So so nowadays there's a lot of things that just aren't, the natural wisdom of natural things aren't really understood and taken into consideration. But yeah, so gut bacteria. So go back to arthritis. Multiple things. Number one, rheumatoid is autoimmune. So if you have, your immune system goes haywire, it decides to attack your weak link. Your weak link comes to your joint. You start getting joint inflammation, joint pain. but also the joints are related to toxic buildup. So when you have a lot of these undigested particles getting in the bloodstream, sometimes the toxins get accumulated, and sometimes they'll start to accumulate in the joints. That's another theory of arthritis, different types of arthritis, whether it's psoriatic arthritis, which is again also linked to the gut. So with psoriasis, your gut lining becomes damaged, and again, some of these other undigested particles get in the bloodstream, and then your detoxification pathways become overburdened because your body's constantly trying to clear the toxins out of the blood. And when that system gets overburdened, then the body will start to use other detox pathways. So sometimes people will complain about bad breath because the lungs are another way of getting rid of these toxins. The skin is another way the body tries to get rid of these toxins. So a lot of times when you're having this issue, you start to develop skin lesions and things similar to psoriasis. But psoriasis also has an autoimmune component as well. But it's kind of the same thing. Like the reason the autoimmune is there is because of the leaky gut, which is causing the stress to the immune system. Now the body's creating antibodies, and whether it's rheumatoid, it's a little different antibodies. Whether it's psoriasis, a little different antibodies, but all variations of the same thing.
You guys, if you've been listening to my podcast, you know I've been talking about Masszymes, which is a digestive enzyme from Bioptimizers. And I want you to know that here's the thing. For me, having a digestive enzyme is a game changer because one of the biggest things that happens to me is I get really tired after my meal if I don't do it, and I have a problem with nutrient absorption. So if you could be eating the cleanest diet ever, but if you're not absorbing it, that's an issue. So this month, they're doing a really great special, and you're going to get a free bottle of the digestive enzymes from Bioptimizers. And so all you have to do is pay a nominal shipping fee. That's it. No other strings attached. It's the best thing ever. So get your free bottle of digestive enzymes. It's called Masszymes. Go to masszymes.com/wasteawayfree and use the coupon code wasteaway10. That's it. So masszymes.com/wasteawayfree. Use the coupon wasteaway10. It's awesome. So one of the things, how every other commercial is really, it's about either like Humira or, one of these commercials that are talking about autoimmune. I mean, it just literally seems like every other commercial is about that. And one thing I was telling my husband is it seems like all of them say that one of the side effects is diarrhea. And I said to him, I bet you anything that these pharmaceuticals, all they do is like just give you such bad diarrhea that it's just cleansing out your gut and it's just cleaning out all those toxins. Because, I meet people all the time and they're like, even, my grandmother, she's 102. And I said to her, how often are you going to the bathroom? And she's like, recently it's been, I used to go, every day, sometimes twice a day. And now I'm, sometimes only going every other day because she's moving less and less. And I'm like, man, that is not good. Like even just every other day, that's a major problem. So what do you suggest people do to make sure they're really going to the bathroom? Like my mom, she's in perfect health, and she says she eats about twice a day, but every time she eats, she poops. Like it's literally like clockwork. Like she eats and poops. And I always say that's kind of one of her claims to fame. Yeah. What do you suggest for people to really be regular?
So, yeah, I think there's all kinds of talk about regular and what's regular, what's not regular. But generally what I try to recommend is at least kind of going once a day and having, a normally formed stool, which means it's not loose or falling apart. It's not floating, or it's not just super hard and kind of pebbles, somewhere in the middle. And again, it's not exactly perfect. Because sometimes people get kind of caught up in like, is it perfect or not? And that's where kind of going like twice a day may be fine. I find that if you're going like after every meal, some places, some sources will say that's good. I'm not so sure. I think sometimes that can be a sign that there's something you're eating is an irritant. So a lot of times people say, oh, as long as I eat blah blah blah, I go fine. But they don't realize that what they're eating is an irritant. And that irritant is causing the body's trying to get rid of it. So, when your food doesn't go through the colon and the small intestine in the right frequency, it can't absorb the nutrients that it needs. So going too frequently or having, diarrhea to kind of clean the system out isn't necessarily ideal. But how do you fix that? So, and again, it just depends on what the issue is. So number one, let's look for food sensitivities. Number two, let's look at, is there some kind of bug or parasite? Is there something that you may be doing that you don't know about? And then working towards retraining the intestines. So another good story is that, the intestines has like its own brain. So the nervous system, there was a study where they found that it was like in the war somewhere, and they had a bunch of people that were like paraplegics, and they had to have enemas every day to go to the bathroom. So every day they would, give them an enema about the same time, and then they would go to the bathroom. And then there was something happened with the war where they couldn't get the enemas, or something happened, and they found that like a large percentage of people were still going at the exact same time every day, because the nervous system in the intestine had created this habit. And a lot of people will tell you, like, yeah, I get up, my clockwork, I get up, I brush my teeth, I go to the bathroom or whatever, like every day at the same time or whatever. And that's part of what you want to do, because when you start getting constipated, you're going like every other day, that almost becomes like your new normal. So you have to retrain that. And sometimes we'll use like magnesium or something to help kind of soften the stool up and get them going a little more frequently. And then once you get a rhythm down, then you can slowly start to back off of the magnesium, and then they start going more normal and create a new habit.
There you go.
So yeah, those are just some of the things we could do.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize like your nervous system, your hormonal system, your immune system can all affect like why you can't poop, like how much caffeine you're using in a day, how much sleep you're getting. Like there's more issues that people don't, think about. But I personally, for me, if I'm feeling remember I said like highs and lows,
right,
feeling like $1 million, it is if I eat and then I poop, I'm feeling like, or twice a day, like that would be, if I'm eating twice a day, then I'm pooping twice a day. That's when I'm feeling my absolute best.
Yeah.
I talk about like kind of what your poop look like. Every time I poop, I always look at what the stool is. So talk a little bit about what your poop should look like, as far as like how long it should be, what color it should be, and what are some of the colors, like if you say, it's floating or different things like that, like this is a problem.
Well, yeah. So I think, that's where I say like sometimes I don't get quite as dogmatic about that as some practitioners might, because I think it depends on a lot of different factors. So if you're eating a lot of fiber and you're eating a lot of vegetables, say, you may have a larger volume of stool, where if you say go carnivore, you're not eating a lot of fiber and your stool is going to be smaller, and it may be maybe a little bit firmer, right? So it really depends on all of these different factors, but in general, you don't want your stool to be floating. So if your stool floats, that means you're not.
What does that mean?
You're not digesting fat. So there's fat. The undigested fats are getting into the stool, and that's where like low stomach acid, not signaling the liver and gallbladder, and the bile is a very big detoxifier. So the bile not only neutralizes the acid, so your stomach makes acid, and then the bile is a base that meets the acid in your small intestine and neutralizes it so that you don't get ulcers. And that's why when they look at H. pylori, they associate with ulcers because you're not signaling the gallbladder. So therefore the acid that you do, the little bit of acid gets into the stomach, and that's causing irritation. So when you make bile, it neutralizes it, but it also is a big detoxifier, which helps pull toxins out of your stool. If you've had your gallbladder removed, again, another one of my pet peeves is that, we need your gallbladder. So we need to learn, how do you save your gallbladder? Not just take it out. Like, oh, you got pain, let's take it out, and then, oh, that wasn't it. Well, whatever, you don't need it anyway, and then people don't have a gallbladder and they don't digest fats very well. So the fatty acid imbalances happen and they don't detox well. And that could be a challenge, going forward. So, but yeah, so if your stool's floating, then it's too much fat in the stool. So you don't want that. If it's super firm, then it's moving through the small intestine, or the large intestine, too slow. And so the longer it stays in your intestine, the colon will pull water out of the stool and make it too firm. Or you're dehydrated, right? So if you're not drinking enough, then you're gonna have a firmer stool. That's why you want to learn how to hydrate and hydrate properly. And that many times is all people need, because a lot of people just dehydrate and don't realize it. So I think, it doesn't have to be perfect one way or the other. Just kind of somewhere in the middle. And depending on how much fiber you're eating and how much water you're drinking, I can tell you a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah, that's a good point. I heard that it's insane how many people are getting their gallbladders removed, like massive amounts. But basically, isn't it pain in your upper right abdomen? Like if you're having pain there, and it's just like a sharp pain there, that would be where your
Yeah, and it's just, again, it's one of these things where, in medicine, they're taught that your gallbladder isn't really that important and that you can be fine without it. Just like you're fine without your thyroid. So they take the thyroid out a lot. You get a nodule or goiter, they just take the whole thing out, and you get some pain in your gallbladder. But a lot of times, the dysfunction, the gallbladder does need to be removed sometimes, so let's be real. If it's necrotic or it's really dysfunctional and it's damaged, then you'd have to remove it. But if we understood how important it was and we looked at it a little closer, we might see, okay, there's some dysfunction here. We need to fix this, where again, our conventional approach isn't really taught that. And they wait until it gets so bad that they have to remove it. But that's a big one. And a lot of times, they'll just remove it because they think that could be the problem. I've had patients come in and say, yeah, I had this pain, and they told me about gallbladder, went and had it removed, and then I still have the exact same pain. So, and when you don't think it's that big a deal, that you don't think twice about removing it. So it's just part of the training. I think if I can get in with all the doctors in their school and teach them about the gallbladder, why it's important, why we need to save it, how to save it, how to diagnose it early, that could be huge.
So what would you say is kind of your favorite diet? Like if some people are having all of these, psoriatic arthritis or rheumatology or thyroid issues, what have you seen in general kind of is the best diet that you recommend some of your patients on for them to be in optimal health?
So that's also a really great question, because, one of the main principles I try to help teach people is that, every diet has its place, and what works for one person may not work for the other person. So there's no rheumatoid diet, there's no MS diet, there's no Hashimoto's diet, and that's kind of how our conventional approach looks at things. So when you read the internet, everybody says, oh, everybody should be a vegetarian, or everybody should do keto, or everybody should do this. But the way I look at it, these are just tools, and that each person is a little bit unique, and some people do better on certain things than others. Some people have an immune reaction to certain vegetables, and so people are like, oh, well, vegetables are healthy. Maybe not for this person, right? And some people have immune reactions to even certain meats like chicken or eggs. So again, if you're just saying, oh, everybody should be paleo, or everybody should be vegetarian, or everybody should be keto, or everybody should do whatever, I just don't look at it that way. So there's no one diet that is the best for each person. And bigger to that point, I'd say is that, we need to cycle our diets. So this is where, people get so dogmatic, like sometimes just changing things up is what we need. So if your body is constantly eating a large amount of carbohydrates, then your body starts to get overburdened with carbohydrate processing. Your receptors start to get desensitized, and then you start developing like insulin resistance, and you start getting, overweight and diabetes, these other problems. But if you go super low carb for a while, that kind of resets your receptors, and then you could go back to eating carbs, and you get the benefit. So there's benefits to eating carbs, and there's benefits to being keto. But people change. They say, "Oh, I went keto, I felt great," and then they just said, "That's it. That's what I need to do." Then they do that forever, and then after like a couple months or however, they start feeling bad again. But it can't be my diet because I'm keto and it's the best. Or same thing with vegetarianism. Like, you change it up and you do just nothing but fresh vegetables. You feel great. And then you get stuck on that for life. Then you end up with these other deficiencies and imbalances. So you need to cycle through different diets at different times. So I don't try to put someone on one diet. I say, okay, we're going to do this for a short period of time to heal your gut, or to use, we need to get all the carbs out of your diet, and we got to get some ketones flowing and reset your carbohydrate receptors so that you can process carbohydrates more effective and become more insulin sensitive. And then when you start to introduce carbs back in, you get a lot of benefits from the carbs, where before they were actually a problem. Where if you stay keto for too long, then that starts to become a problem. You got to get out of ketogenesis, and get into eating carb burning to get that fixed.
So one of the things that I've done myself is I've taken some of those different, food allergy tests.
Yeah.
And I feel like they always come back different. Like they literally, like this one comes, because I've done so many of them, and I'm like, I just don't believe them. So what is your opinion on that? Because it's like, this one says this, then you take another one and then it says this, and then you take another one and it says this, and it's just like, you don't know what to believe.
And that's why I say that, there's only certain labs that I will use, and I don't really like most of the food sensitivity tests that are out there, especially that are blood based. Because I find the same thing, and it's just not good information. It doesn't tell you anything, and I think it just depends on, if you have damage to your gut lining and you take this test, and depending on what you've eaten over the last week or two, that may be what shows up.
Mm-hmm.
That if you change your diet around and then you take it again, you get something different. So I'm not really sure how helpful that is.
So what is your suggestion to do more of a, let's cut more of an elimination diet, kind of cut this and see how you feel?
Well, number one, I think that the testing that looks at the mucous membranes, to me, is more accurate. And it's also telling us, okay, these are like the foundational things that are really irritating your gut lining and causing problems. And then it'll do, like a elimination diet with that information.
So is that with stool instead of blood work?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So it's looking at the stool, not looking at the blood.
So you would just take a stool sample, and then they'd say, looking at this stool sample, this is the foods that are showing that it's causing inflammation.
Yeah, these are the foods that your body is making antibodies to in the mucous membranes. Yeah, because again, that's where it starts. And then if that continues, then other foods get into the bloodstream. So it's kind of like, what I call a downstream principle. If you have a dirty stream, you can create a fancy filter to clean the water. But if you go upstream and stop dumping the dirt in water, they don't worry about the filter. You know what I mean? So we want to go as upstream as far as we can and get to the root. And then that may have an impact on everything going forward.
Well, I know that you have treated thousands of patients, and there's probably a good chance that you've treated someone with your exact condition. So if you are liking what Dr. Scott is saying, then he is helping people left and right. And with the functional approach, instead of just throwing you on some kind of pharmaceutical, which I'm totally against. So Dr. Mark Scott, tell everyone where they can find you and where they can follow you.
Yeah, so a good place to go is to our website. So it's totalhealthcenterbb.com. And once you go on our website, there's tons of information and lots of links. And you can go to my YouTube sites and Vimeo page and all the other stuff, navigating through that website. And that's a good place to start to find out a little bit of what I'm doing. And then if you're interested in learning more, you can request a free consultation. And I do a lot of this stuff over Zoom and through phone calls, and it works really well, virtually, like we're doing today, talking.
Yeah, just doing it virtually.
Yeah.
Well, you are a blessing in my life, and I'm just grateful for you and your friendship. Thanks so much for being with us, and you guys stay tuned. We've got another episode coming up in just a few. Bye-bye for now.